What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, your home for the 2020 World Series champion Los Angeles Dodgers. My name is Jeff Spiegel. I'm joined, as always, each week by Daniel Starkand. Daniel Starkand's broom is with us. Daniel, The Athletic has the Dodgers back in the number one spot in their power rankings, up from number 3. All is right in the world, yes?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why they ever left. I was just telling you off the stream that I feel a little nasty bringing this guy out for the lowly Diamondbacks who have lost like 17 straight games now or whatever it is. But hey, we'll take the wins however we could get them. We're still in second place here. Unfortunately, the Giants won't stop losing, or won't stop winning, I should say. So it's good to see the Dodgers going and do what they're supposed to do at Chase Field. I think there's kind of collectively amongst Dodger fans, we're all a little nervous. Like, yes, we know how bad the Diamondbacks are, but we've seen what the Dodgers are capable of at times. So it's good to see them go in there, take 3 straight. It was a good week overall. 5 of 6, playing good baseball right now. So no complaints over here.
Yeah, you and I were both on a text stream where I think somebody joked that it would not surprise anybody if the Dodgers somehow lost 2 out of 3 to the Diamondbacks. As you said, thankfully they didn't. Dodgers at this point have won 10 of their last 12. They're a game and a half back of the Giants, 3.5 games ahead of the Padres. The caveat is those 12 games, they played the last place Pirates, the last place Rangers, the Phillies, who are a game under 500, and the last place Diamondbacks. As you mentioned, 5 of their last 6 since Monday. A couple things I found interesting. Fangraphs currently has the Dodgers 74% chance to win the division. They are projected to win the division by 6 games. So hopefully some comfort there for the Dodgers at the end. Fabian Ardaya points out, of course, this has all been done without the Dodgers, with the Dodgers missing a handful of their best players, a long stretch without a number 5 starter, that kind of thing. One other note I found interesting, the Dodgers lead the league in runs scored with 2 outs. So some fun facts for you there, but the Dodgers, again, in good shape. So here's a plan for the show today. We're going to go give an overview of the week that was. We'll do the week in quotes. This is a rebranding of our big deal, no deal segment because I'm really bad at asking big deal or no deals questions. I tend to just give you a quote and say, what do you think? So week in quotes, we're going to try a rebrand. Stock up, stock down. We got a fun segment on some trade targets, some relief pitchers who might be available, as well as a big bat that might be available. We'll talk about that. And then look ahead, week ahead, starting tonight, Dodgers, Padres, and then Dodgers, Cubs. So a big week for the Dodgers. But let's get into just kind of the week that we just saw. I know Daniel and I were here on Thursday, but we'll pretend like we weren't and go back to last Monday. I did a live postgame show last Monday. It was a game the Dodgers mustered just 3 hits, but 2 of them were home runs. Chris Taylor and Will Smith put the Dodgers ahead. The Dodgers win 3-1 over the Phillies. Tuesday, Dodger Stadium, full capacity. Mookie Betts, go-ahead home run in the 7th. Dodgers win 5-3. Wednesday, the Dodgers get shut out for the first time in almost 2 years. They can't complete the sweep of the Phillies. Friday, Steven Souza hits the go-ahead home run in the 8th inning, makes a great catch. Again, the Dodgers win despite getting just 3 hits. Saturday, Walker Buehler no-hitter to the 8th. Will Smith and Chris Taylor again with home runs and a 9-3 win there. And then Sunday, the Dodgers take a 9-1 lead. They almost blow it. The Diamondbacks lose their 17th in a row. Pujols home run, A.J. Pollock, 3 hits. I have to admit, the most memorable thing for me would be having the Dodgers minus 1.5 yesterday and seeing them blow an 8-run lead to only win by 1. That was a big L for me. But when you look back,
they almost added an insurance run in the top of the 9th there that you would have been good, but they couldn't get that one home. So yeah, that was a bad beat right there.
It was a bad beat. I had a few L's on my calendar yesterday. I will say Friday I gave out 3 different winners. I gave A.J. Pollock under total bases, that hit. I gave Dodgers minus 1.5, that hit. And I also gave first 5 under, that hit. So, we did okay this weekend. But when you think back to this week, I mean, again, we've got the full capacity crowd. We've got the Mookie home run, Steven Souza with the big moment. Is there anything that jumps out to you as kind of a defining moment from the past week?
I'd say probably 2 things. The first one is Walker Buehler's outing. I mean, he was awesome. We just talked last week about his lack of strikeouts and if that's concerning. And we're a little concerned, not overly concerned. But he kind of shut us up real quick. He went out and punched out 11. He took a no into the 8th. So that was just a great outing for him. And he's been awesome, for the past pretty much all year, but especially over the last month or so. So, that stood out to me. And then also I'll get into this more once we do stock up, stock down. But Albert Pujols has also he just continues to be awesome for the Dodgers. Another big 3-run homer yesterday. So I'd say those are probably the two things. I know the Souza homer was also awesome. Just considering it was against his former team and going into that series, he
Yeah.
had said how much he wants to get back at them. So that was pretty cool too.
Totally. And I loved, all those completely agree. The Mookie home run on Tuesday was awesome. I love that it was
Yeah,
caught by that great catch by the fan out in the bleachers,
yeah,
by the way, with the Mookie Betts jersey on. The whole thing was perfect. So just a cool one of those moments where, yes, it's a game against the Phillies. It was a big, go ahead home run in the seventh, but just a cool first night with the full capacity crowd.
definitely.
Mookie Betts, of course, not playing in front of a crowd last year. Just a cool moment there. So let's get into the week in quotes. We'll start with some injury updates. Cody Bellinger, Max Muncy, Corey Seager, of course, three of the Dodgers' best players, all currently on the injured list, varying degrees of how close they are. The good news is both Bellinger and Muncy are expected back at the beginning of this week at some point for this Padres series. Here's a couple quotes from Dave Roberts. On Wednesday, he said that Cody Bellinger was at 100%. Thursday was a recovery day. He responded really well. And then when asked whether he was expecting both of them back early this week, I don't know which days yet. Both of those guys I expect to be activated sometime in the next series. Corey Seager is expected to go on a rehab assignment towards the end of the week. Quote, yeah, I don't know. I think it can be asked how many rehab games he would play. I think sometimes it can be 3 games. Sometimes it can be 7 or 8. I think it's player dependent. Corey's very in tune with his mechanics. Once he feels ready to go, I believe he'll be pretty accurate. So obviously huge news for the Dodgers with Bellinger and Muncy both expected back for this Padres series. Seager in a couple weeks. I guess the question is, we've seen how these guys have, not these particular guys, but guys have struggled right after they become activated with or without rehab assignments. So is there any concern with you bringing those guys back in the midst of a really big series where maybe they're not 100%, they're not totally dialed in yet? Or is the gap between Max Muncy and, say, an Albert Pujols or a Matt Beatty so big that even if you're getting 70% of Muncy, you just take your chances and throw them in there?
Yeah, I think it's kind of different for Muncy and Bellinger. I'm with you on Muncy. Not only is he, that much better, but I think what someone like him, like he's dependent on, his eye a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Like he's got the best eye in baseball. He works his walks, he works counts. So even just having that alone like is a huge, boost. And he's only been out, the minimum 10 days or whatever it is. Yeah, I think he's eligible to be activated on Tuesday, which is tomorrow. So he'll miss the first game of the series, then hopefully be back for game 2. So that'll be huge, just having his presence, even if he's not, hitting 2-3 homers a series or whatever. Bellinger, I'm not really sure, just because we haven't really seen Cody Bellinger like at all this season. Like we've seen, we saw him for like 5 games to start the year, then we saw him for like a week when he came back, then he got hurt again. He hasn't looked like himself at all when we've seen him. So I'm not exactly sure what we'll be getting out of him. I will say, having his defense alone is also a huge boost.
Yeah.
Like there's no one can play center field like him. I mean, Mookie's pretty good in center, but then you lose his defense and right by shifting him over. So I think defensively that's a huge boost. We'll see what he could give at the plate. But yeah, I mean, when you're replacing the last 2 guys on the bench with 2 all-stars, MVP candidate type guys, that's always a good thing. I know the Dodgers bench is actually pretty solid right now. So I'm actually curious to see, who's going to get the boot once they're back. I guess Andy Burns, will probably get one of them, even though he's been solid. And then we'll see who the other one is, because Souza's been really good.
Yeah.
Maybe they option a reliever. I guess, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, obviously, having them back for the Padres, I guess, like I said, my hesitancy is it's great to have them back for the Padres. And yes, obviously, nobody is arguing about whether Cody Bellinger or Max Muncy is better than Matt Beatty or whoever.
Yeah.
But I guess I've seen enough this year. Like, none of these guys come off of the IL and just start killing it. Like, Bellinger struggled a lot. McKinstry struggled a lot. And so just something to watch. Muncy, I agree. I think it's a different situation with him. Somebody pointed out he actually hit a home run in the at-bat after he injured himself. And so, and his injury, it seems like, is way more precautionary. They said he hasn't been feeling any pain. They're just like, hey, it's something he's dealt with, so we're going to be cautious. Bellinger, on the other hand, it's the hamstring. So again, if you're talking about a muscle that probably isn't super impactful when it comes to your swing, a hamstring is a good one. It's going to be way more concerning when he sprints out of the box or has to chase down a ball in center field. So in some ways I can talk myself into it one way or the other, but I guess I'll just be curious to see. It sounded like maybe Tuesday was the day for Bellinger. We'll see if that's changed, whether he gets activated in time for tonight's game or not. But good news there either way to have them back for both of these two big series. And then Corey Seager. Obviously he's been out for about a month. He's got another week until he's going to start a rehab assignment. And Roberts indicated it could be a 4-day rehab assignment. It could be a 10-day rehab assignment. We don't know yet. And so, but again, with Seager, it's like, he's a guy who I don't know how to, like, he doesn't strike me as like a guy who's a big thinker when he gets into the box. He's kind of just a grip it and rip it guy. And so that seems to me like somebody who would respond much better to rehab. It's a guy who's been on a bunch of rehab assignments. And so you just get down there, you play a couple games. All right, good, ready to go. I saw 97. I hit it. We're locked in. So a huge boost, obviously, for the Dodgers for Seager to be back sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah. And I remember when Seager, I think it was spring training last year, he had just got, or 2019, I think, when he had just gotten back from the Tommy John and hip surgeries. It was like towards the end of the spring when he played his first game and he stepped in there and hit a homer in his first game. So yeah, he's a guy who could definitely just kind of roll out of bed and hit. With him, it just comes down to health. So if he's healthy, I trust that he's going to be hitting the ball, like Corey Seager usually does, and that just kind of shifts everyone down in the lineup even more. Like when he's back, that's without question the deepest lineup in baseball.
Yeah.
We talked on our last show about how we've only seen like the Dodgers top 5 guys like in the same lineup, like I think like 3 times. This year. So it'll be good just to have everyone back. Who knows? By then, someone else will probably be hurt, considering the luck the Dodgers have had this year. But yeah, Seager is obviously a huge piece to the puzzle. And getting him back, even let him take as much time as he needs for a rehab assignment, whether it's a week, 10 days, whatever it is. They've been managing just fine without him, but getting him back will definitely be a huge boost.
Absolutely. Well, we got a lot of injury updates in the week in quotes this week. The next one is a conversation about Tony Gonsolin. Of course, Gonsolin on Sunday, his best start of the season, but still just 46 pitches, 3 2/3 innings. Dave Roberts, when asked why he was pulled so early, quote, he had some soreness after his last start. So just to make sure we get through this one, he's able to make his next start. Just watching the workload in particular this start. Part of the reason that question came up is because A, how short it was, but B, his velocity was down 2 to 3 mile an hour over his average. They called it, quote, shoulder tiredness. I'm not sure that's a medical diagnosis, but there you go. They said it was similar to what he dealt with earlier in the season. Gonsolin, when asked about it, quote, not a high level of concern at all. Very confident he can make his next start. So what do you make of Tony Gonsolin, a guy who's dealt with shoulder issues? He did say it's shoulder tiredness. It is the same shoulder, but he did say it's different. It's not the same thing. It felt more muscular, just tired, not hurt. So what do you make of all this level of concern for Gonsolin, who we're going to talk about a guy like Josiah Gray, who might be in perfect situation to the number 6 starter. The Dodgers don't really have a backup plan at number 5 starter right now.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's good that he's optimistic, but it's definitely concerning. I mean, he missed the first 2 months of this season with a shoulder injury, came back, clearly hasn't looked like himself this year. We talked, on the last show about how his walk numbers are way up. He in his first 2 starts, he already had 7 walks, which is what he had all of last season. So that was very uncharacteristic of him. I guess it's a good thing to see, like, that at least he's dealing with something. So like he has not an excuse, but at least it's a reason for the lack of command, for him not looking like himself. But obviously a shoulder issue is never ideal. That and elbow are the 2 things you never want to see. And like you said, the Dodgers don't really have a true backup plan here. So even though Gonsolin hasn't really contributed a lot so far this season, like his importance to this team is like as much as anyone at the moment, just because you can't go through a whole season with bullpen games. So like you said, they're going to have to find a backup plan. Josiah Gray would be one option. He's not even on the 40-man roster yet, so that would take some maneuvering to do. But I guess if you got to do it, you got to do it. But yeah, let's just hope it's not a serious issue. Let's hope he bounces back in his next start, because we've seen the toll the bullpen games have taken on this team, and I don't think they could continue doing that in the long term.
Yeah, with Gonsolin, it's a wait and see thing for me, because I'm with you. I like the optimism out of him, but I'm also thinking if I'm a guy who's only made 3 or 4 starts, was probably pissed to have been shut down for 2 months, not pissed at the Dodgers, but pissed at just his body and the way that it reacted. Like, he's going to try and speak into existence that he's fine.
Right.
Like, I can see that going that way. So that's why I'm like, I don't put a ton of stock into what he said. The fact that they came out and said, yeah, it's shoulder, it's tired, it's, that's the deal. Because and the fact that the velocity was down, the fact that his pitch count only got to 46. I mean, he got pulled in the middle of an inning in which the Dodgers were cruising. And so, that was the perfect situation where if you're going to try and stretch a guy out, that would have been it. So definitely something to monitor, to concern. We mentioned Josiah Gray. This is the next quote. Dave Roberts was asked about him. He was a guy that was asked, hey, is this someone who can soak up innings? Quote, that was part of the plan, the sort of the plan at the outset of the season. I think he's maybe playing catch. I don't think he's throwing bullpens, let alone facing hitters. He's sort of a ways down the road. Hopefully we can revisit this conversation and he can be a part of things. So, again, there was a report about a month, 6 weeks ago that Josiah Gray was going to make a spot start. Like you said, he's not on the 40-man. They would have had to do some maneuvering there. But he ended up having a shoulder injury. As Dave Roberts points out, he's not even throwing bullpens yet. He's maybe playing catch. So, not to say this is a big deal for the Dodgers this year. Obviously, long term, I'm not worried about Josiah Gray, but it is like we said, he was going to be the next starter. David Price has not been allowed to go through the lineup more than once. We know Jimmy Nelson, with his injury history, they're just going to leave him at 1 to 2 innings in the bullpen. Then you've got other guys like Mitch White, Edwin Uceda, who I know we're going to talk about in a little bit, and stock up and stock down. Those would be sort of your next options when it comes to starters. And then I think the other guy who I had Justin Lorber on last week, which, by the way, if you missed that episode, please go check it out. Justin was on talking Keibert Ruiz, Diego Cartaya, some risers and fallers in the farm system, really good stuff. But one of the guy that I really liked in spring training who's been really good this year is Andre Jackson, and he's actually on the 40-man. So he would seem to be the type of guy who would maybe be the number 6 starter. He's never pitched in the majors, though. So, we don't really need to sort of dwell on that too much longer, but it's just worth noting the quotes on Josiah Gray and just how a guy they were hoping would soak up innings isn't there. So if Gonsolin's hurt, it could be problematic. Next on the sort of in the vein of injuries, let's talk a little Brusdar Graterol. Dave Roberts was asked about an update on him. Quote, he's doing okay. The velocity is good. I think the outings have been up and down. He's trying to manage the slider, command it, shorten it, strike it. He's doing okay. He just needs to get better. We're watching every outing. Graterol this season at AAA, 7 1/3, 10 strikeouts, 2 walks. That's all good. 5 earned runs though in 7 1/3. So I'm not overwhelmed with optimism based on that Dave Roberts quote. He's doing okay. And you look at his numbers, and that almost seems generous. You like the strikeout numbers, 10 strikeouts in 7 1/3. That's what you want to see. That's something he's struggled with, but not exactly overwhelmingly positive from Dave Roberts when it comes to Graterol.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't seen these outings, so I can't really comment. But I hope at least he's using this time to kind of work on his game and work on that slider a lot. You that you just mentioned, Dave Roberts mentioned it, so I assume that's what's taking place. You can't really work on a pitch in games at the big league level. That's how you get punished. So when you're at AAA, that's the time to do it. Yes, you want results. Like you said, the strikeout numbers are good to see because with his velocity, he should be striking out a lot more than he has, in his major league career. So that's a positive. Like you said, the runs is not ideal. That his ERA's over 7 or something. I know it's a small sample, but the main thing is just that I hope that he's at least working on that breaking ball, because that's really what he needs to develop, that slider, to really miss bats and that if you have a good off-speed pitch that plays up your fastball even more. And we know how great his fastball is. He's routinely sitting 100, hitting 102. So that'll look even faster if he has a breaking ball that he could trust at least a little bit. So hopefully he's working on that. There's no rush. We're gonna talk more about how good the Dodgers bullpen, at least the main guys, not necessarily the fringe guys, but those guys have been holding down the fort. So it's not like the Dodgers need Graterol right now. Totally. So as long as he's working on stuff, hopefully we'll see him later in the year. He's still really young, so I think that's something to remember as well. I know everyone, jumped on the Graterol train last year saying he should be the closer already, but he's still really young. He's got a long way to go. So I think this time in AAA is doing good for him. Who knows how much we'll see him this year. I hope we see him, at some point, but I guess we'll just wait and see there.
As you said, we're going to have a bigger conversation about the bullpen in just a moment. I guess my reaction when I think about it is there's a lot of guys out there. And if the Dodgers really do make a move, we're going to talk about some trade candidates.
Yeah.
It's it's not like they are desperate for Brusdar Graterol to join that
Right.
group. They would like it. He's got the stuff to be elite. But until he shows it, the Dodgers aren't going to go out of their way to let him just like try things out at the major league level. So last one here. This is a funny question that Dave Roberts got asked, and I'm going to ask you. Has Julio Urias replaced Clayton Kershaw as your pinch hitter when you're out of position players? Kershaw this season hitting 261 with a 292 on base percentage, all singles, so 261 slug as well. Urias 231 batting average, no walks, so 231 on base, but he does have at least one extra base hit. Couple, I think. He's got a 308 slugging percentage. So lower batting average, higher slugging percentage. Here's what Roberts said. Quote, I'll tell you, collectively, our starters driving in some runs and taking good at-bats. I think we've got a very sustainable RBI lead compared to the other starters around baseball. They're both good. They're both good. I think I can't go wrong with either Clayton or Julio taking an at-bat in a big spot. You got a preference, Daniel? You scouted this out a little bit. Kershaw versus Urias. Who do you want pinch hitting with the bases loaded when Roberts runs out of position players in the 8th inning?
Yeah, it's honestly pretty close. Like Kershaw was the guy for a while there, but Julio's really come on of late. He's driven in like 5 runs in his last like 3 starts or something, which is just ridiculous. But I still think it's Kershaw. I think he's gonna give you a better at bat. Like he could work a count if you need it. He could maybe take a walk. Like you said, he's not gonna give you more than a single, but hey, sometimes that's all you need, especially when the bases are loaded. So I think I still lean him, but I've definitely been pretty impressed with Julio and his slugging. Slugging over 300. That's not something that's easy to do when you're a pitcher who never hits. So that's pretty impressive right there.
Yeah, we won't name anybody, but there's a couple guys on the Dodgers roster that I think would kill for a 231 or a 261 batting average, which these guys are putting together. Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, Kershaw, I just like the effort. Like he goes up there, he chokes up on the bat, he's slapping pitches away. And admittedly, I have seen more Kershaw at bats this year than I have Urias at bats, and so obviously the numbers speak for themselves. But we got to get Kershaw the Silver Slugger. I mean, Julio's got to chill a little bit just because he can't be taking that away from Kershaw.
Yeah, right.
They asked Walker Buehler. They've got some sort of point total going on because he was asked. I think Buehler had like 3 sacrifice bunts the other day, and he was like, yeah, you get like 1 point for a sacrifice bunt, but he's like, it doesn't really matter because like Julio and Kershaw have all these singles and runs and RBIs. Like he's like, sacrifice bunts aren't pulling me even there. So but hey, the Dodgers out since Zach Greinke, the Dodgers haven't really had a pitcher that you trusted to hit. I mean, and again, when I say trusted, the Dodgers aren't actually trusting them. They are trusting them relative to the Rich Hills of the world who just go up there with the bat on their shoulder and look pathetic swinging the bat. So it's fun to have a couple guys. I mean, again, 231 and 261 are like respectable. Solid. That's more than respectable from pitchers. So
they're driving in runs too. That's huge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's move into stock up and stock down. This will transition us into a conversation, like I said, about the bullpen and that kind of thing. So I'll let you go first. We each pick 3 guys or groups of people who sort of are trending in the right direction over the past week or so. So I'll let you go first, Daniel. Who you got first in the stock up and stock down?
Yeah, my first one, I guess it's kind of a combo. It's a stock up and a stock down, and they kind of go together. For the stock up, it's Will Smith. He's been swinging it, really well as of late. He had 2 homers last week. His OPS is right around 1,200, which is, was the highest on the team. So, we all know Will Smith rakes, but he's been especially hot over the last week. And in that same category, Austin Barnes on the stock downside, he's got a 444 OPS over the last week. The Dodgers' lone loss of the week came, when they got shut out by the Phillies. Austin Barnes comes up in a 2-0 game in the 9th. A guy on first, no one out, and he hits into just a back-breaking double play. And then right after that, I think this is like a perfect, microcosm of the Dodgers catcher situation. Will Smith comes up right after that and gets hit by a pitch and gets on base. We're saying that night Smith should have been hitting for Barnes. That definitely should have been the case, but it is what it is. But I just want to see Will Smith playing as much as possible. I don't enjoy as much. Barnes is a solid backup catcher. Like, I'm not trying to hate on Barnes, but I just think the playing time should be a lot more in favor of Will Smith. And it's starting to trend in that direction for sure. So, yeah.
Yeah. My thing has always been like, okay, you're without 3 of your best hitters right now. Like, this is the point in the season where Smith should be playing like, 9 out of every 10 games, basically. Like, if you need to rest the guy in 6 weeks when theoretically you've got some more health, like Austin Barnes' bat can get hit in somewhere. Like right now in games where Matt Beatty is starting or Zach McKinstry is starting or Pujols is starting, like those are games when it's like to have Austin Barnes in there next to those guys is just completely unhelpful. And so I'm with you. I mean, we know how we feel about both those guys. You mentioned Barnes' OPS. Just for context, Julio Urias' OPS on the season is 539 and Kershaw's is 532. Sorry, I butchered that. 539 for Urias and 553 for Kershaw. So there you go. Barnes is under 500 over the past week. I'll go stock up. I'll pair a couple guys, Steven Souza Jr. and Andy Burns. Neither of these guys has been like amazing lights out, but they've just been solid. They've been competent. It's what we said when Pujols came over. Like the bar for the back of the Dodgers bench has been lowered so low that all we're looking for is competitive at bats, occasional base hits, and just be a competent major league level player. Andy Burns over the past week, 3 for 11 with 3 walks, does have a double. So, 6 for 14. He's got like an on-base percentage of about 400 over that stretch. Plays a bunch of positions. Good for him. Souza, even better. 3 for 13, but does have a triple, does have a home run. Had a great catch in right field. Obviously, the game-winning homer. I love this quote from Trevor Bauer. The play he made down the right field corner was spectacular. The whole time he was going down there, I was like, just stop. Don't get hurt. Don't get hurt. He somehow managed to catch it and not get hurt. A really impressive play. He kind of rode the momentum, hit the home run, got us going. We needed that. I'm happy for him. Souza was asked about it. He kind of said, I knew I was running full speed. I didn't want to run into the wall. He said he took his eyes off the ball, looked at the wall, and basically decided, I'm just going to slide and stick my glove out and hope for the best. Ball lands in his glove.
It worked.
So, great defense out there. Home run, triple. Again, this is a guy who has a 30 home run season at the major league level. He's the perfect example of a difficult decision that might be facing the Dodgers at some point. Because a guy like Souza, he's not there yet, but I mean, like a guy like Matt Beatty, the gap between Souza and Beatty, I'd be curious to see sort of what happens to that gap as time goes on. Obviously, AJ Pollock is in the outfield mix as well. Beatty plays a little bit of first base, which probably helps him, but Souza's a solid defender. So Souza and Burns, that's my first stock up.
Yeah, and I think with the struggles we've seen from the Dodgers against left-handed pitching, it helps having some righties off the bench as opposed to, more lefties, which was the case earlier with, Luke Raley and Matt Beatty, like you mentioned. So yeah, those guys, those guys have been everything we'd hoped. Like you said, we're not asking for a lot here. We're just asking for some sort of competence, and they've given the Dodgers that, which has been huge. My next stock up is Albert Pujols. We saw the homer yesterday. His numbers still aren't eye-popping by any means, but I saw a pretty incredible stat. I think it was Eric Steven that tweeted it out. Since Pujols joined the Dodgers, he has 6 homers, which is tied for the team lead with Max Muncy and Chris Taylor. So I don't think you could ask for much more than that, to be honest. If I would have told you when the Dodgers, acquired Pujols a month later, he would have, the most homers on the team since he came over. That's pretty incredible right there. So it's been fun to watch. He looks like he's having fun. And who knows, maybe I didn't think there was a chance he'd get to 700 home runs because I thought he'd be done after this season. But, the way he's been playing, who knows? Maybe he's got another year or two left in him.
Yeah, Pujols this year has a WAR of 0.3 for the Dodgers. He had put up negative WAR for the Angels every season as far back as 2017. So you would have to go back to like between 2014 and 2020. He put up the same amount of WAR for the Angels that he has already put up for the Dodgers. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, good stuff there. My next stock up, Walker Buehler. This is an obvious one, and I just have to give him a shout out because I expressed some skepticism about him last week. And I will say, if you watched our weekend preview show with Rob, I did say, hey, I'm still skeptical about him, but I'm not fading him against the Diamondbacks. It is the Diamondbacks after all. Like, this isn't the week he comes back and regresses. Carrying a no-hitter into the 8th inning against anybody is impressive. 7 1/3, 11 strikeouts, 2 walks, 2 hits. He only allowed 1 hard hit ball all night. That was the last single he gave up. His last 3 starts, you kind of hinted at this, 20 1/3 innings, just 2 earned runs. So he's doing, he's keeping runs off the board. That's ultimately the most important thing. The underlying metrics don't really matter until they catch up with you. They haven't caught up with him. So will they catch up with him? Remains to be seen, but I got to give Buehler a shout out. I was skeptical. He had a great outing. Got to give him a shout out.
Yeah, yeah, and you mentioned those 2 earned runs over 20 innings. Those runs scored after he
Yep.
came out of the game, which leads right into my next stock down, which is the Dodgers long relievers, the last guys in the bullpen. It's been the case all season, but they're still not getting it done, no
Yep.
matter who it is. Like Mitch White came in after Bueller, and I know that was like an 8-0 game or whatever, so it wasn't a huge deal. But he came in and 2 batters later, both those runs had score. It scored. I think what was the final score of that game? 8-3. So it never got truly close, but they were threatening there with a couple runners on, and it was starting to look like what yesterday ended up looking like.
Yeah.
Like it started to get a little dangerous there, but it'd be nice if Mitch White could come in and shut the door there, and let Bueller have 0 earned runs for what was an incredible outing. And then yesterday, Edwin Uceda, same deal. His was worse.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that actually became a game. The Dodgers had to use 2 of their high leverage guys, which is never ideal in a game you lead 9-1, and that's been happening just way too much this year. So
Yeah.
those guys, it's similar to the back end of the bench guys. Like, we're not asking you to be great, just be average, just come in, give up a run or 2 in a 9-1 game, but let's
Yeah.
not give up the 5 runs that makes it eventually a 1-run game. And who knows, luckily that Kenley came in and shut the door, but if he makes one bad pitch and a guy hits it out of the ballpark, then it's a tie game there.
Yeah.
And that's not ideal against the worst team in baseball when you were leading 9-1. So those guys, they got to be at least a little better. We're not asking for a whole lot here.
Totally, totally. Well, piggybacking off that, my last stock up is going to be the back end of the bullpen. Jansen, Trinan, and Nelson the past week, 7 innings, no earned run, no walks, 8 strikeouts. And honestly, as a whole, I was doing a bit of research on the bullpen. And what's interesting is like we're getting to the point where Uceda and Mitch Whites of the world just aren't going to be on the roster.
Yeah.
And we're not going to have to worry about those 2 guys. And if you take them off, it's been pretty good. Bickford, who, noted fan of Bickford over here, 10 out of his 12 appearances have been scoreless. I like that he gave them 2 scoreless innings on Wednesday after having pitched on Tuesday. Clevenger was back this week, 2 1/3 innings, 3 strikeouts, just 2 base runners for him. It's kind of one of these things where all of a sudden I really like the group of bullpen arms that the Dodgers have put together. And this is where we're going to transition in to a conversation about making a trade for a bullpen guy. But you've got Jansen, Trinan, and Nelson. You've got Gonzalez and Price, who are 2 guys that you and I think both trust a lot. So there's 5 guys at the back end of your bullpen that, look, we're not saying, like, aside from Jansen, we're probably not talking about anybody that belongs in the All-Star game. I mean, Jimmy Nelson's been really good, but, like, hasn't really been tested in really big leverage spots quite yet, starting to get there. But those are not 5, like, elite relievers, but it's 5, like, really good, maybe top, like, 30 to 40 relievers in all of baseball type guys. And then you get to the front end and you throw Bickford, you throw Joe Kelly, who's looked good. You've got Clevenger, Scott Alexander, who is really good when he comes back. Graterol, if he ever puts it together. Knable, if and when he's ever healthy. And all of a sudden, you start looking at, okay, the Dodgers typically carry 14 pitchers in the postseason. You take your starters 4, you maybe move Gonsolin to the pen. Then all of a sudden, you've got 9 relievers, which would be Jansen, Trinan, Nelson, Gonzalez, Price, Knable if he's healthy, Kelly, Bickford, which leaves only 1 spot for either Graterol, Alexander, or Clevenger. So you'd imagine that they're probably leaning lefty there, and maybe it's like Bickford versus Graterol for that last spot. But all of a sudden, that group, there's no Edwin Uceda, there's no Mitch White. That group all of a sudden becomes a really strong bullpen. So before I go into some guys who are projected to potentially be available, Daniel, I'm curious when you look at it that way and say Gonsolin plus Jansen, Trinan, Nelson, Gonzalez, Price, Knable, Kelly, Bickford, and let's say Scott Alexander. That's a bullpen I think I feel really good about.
Yeah, that's a really good bullpen. I think that's how we've kind of felt all year. It's just a case of how many of those guys are healthy at one time. Like this season, it's kind of just been one guy after another going down, and that's why they've had to rely on the Mitch Whites, the Ucedas, the Dennis Santanas of the world. Like none of those guys, when we were sitting here in spring training, like none of those guys were projected to make the opening day roster. They weren't even really the first guys to be called up, but the Dodgers had just been peppered with so many injuries in their bullpen, and in their rotation with Dustin May, that's forced them to use more bullpen games, which you need more relievers for. So I think it's always been the case of if everyone's healthy, or at least almost everyone, like we're in pretty good shape. Maybe we could add a guy at the deadline. But yeah, I definitely think the Dodgers bullpen's in good shape. And I agree with you that like outside of maybe Kenley, like there's not a top 10 bullpen arm,
Yeah.
in baseball that they have, but they have 5 top 50 arms, like
Yeah.
they got a lot, some solid depth. They got a lot of guys you could trust, which is huge. And we'll see who remains healthy and who doesn't. Obviously, we hope all those guys could stay
Yeah.
healthy and be ready for the playoffs. But yeah, just when you look down the road, the thought of getting, Scott Alexander back, Knable eventually,
Yeah.
the bullpen starts to look really good once you get, you take those guys and they're replacing the Mitch Whites and Usadas of the world for sure.
Yeah, and when I say 5 of the top 40 or 50, like you said, Knable would also be in that group if he's healthy.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, then
Yeah.
you're at 6. So I say all that because I do want to have a conversation. I think there's been a lot of talk about the Dodgers, as usual, being a team that's going to be active at the trade deadline. And the big assumption is going to be that the place that they look to address is the bullpen. Now, I don't know if that's because people know information that you and I are not privy to, or if that's because people are just generally dissatisfied with the Dodger bullpen at all times. And so they just assume there. But keep in mind, as I mention these names, I'm going to give you a scouting report on 4 different guys that Jim Bowden of The Athletic, as well as some other folks, have mentioned as possibly available. Keep in mind that if I'm talking about a left-handed pitcher, this is somebody that would probably take the spot of, say, Alexander or Clevenger as the second or as the third lefty in the bullpen behind
Mhm.
Gonzalez and Price. Now, you don't necessarily need 3 lefties, but the Dodgers have kind of trended that way. And if I mention a right-handed pitcher, you're probably talking about a guy that would need to be an upgrade over Bickford, Graterol, maybe even Gonsolin. Because if Gonsolin pitches the way he's been pitching, I don't think he's a sure thing to be on the postseason roster when you compare some of those. So let me throw 4 names at you, and I'll give you sort of the scouting report on each of these guys, Daniel, and then you can tell me what you think as a big picture once we get. So the first one, these are in no particular order. Paul Fry, relief pitcher from Baltimore. He's a lefty. He's 28 years old. He's got 3 years of arbitration remaining. This is a guy right now, 99th percentile in barrel rate, 90th plus percentile in all the expected numbers: on base average, ERA, batting average, slugging percentage, hard hit percentage, strikeout percentage, all 90th percentile. The downside to him, the walk rate is not very good. But this is a guy who's doing it in Baltimore, so you've probably never heard about him. He is their closer, doesn't get a ton of opportunities to close games. And I will say, 2020, his numbers were all good. All his expected numbers were 94th percentile or higher last year. So again, 28-year-old lefty, 3 years of arbitration remaining. So there's number 1. Number 2, Michael Fulmer, right-hander from Detroit, former AL Rookie of the Year, starter, now converted to reliever, 28 years old, 1 more year of arbitration after this year. Expected numbers in the 50 to 65th percentile range, but the barrel percentage, hard hit percentage, average exit velocity, all elite. Solid whiff rate. He's got a 3.5 ERA, a 1.26 whip, 4-to-1 strikeout to walk ratio. Last year, he was really bad, almost a 9 ERA, a whip over 2. So there you're kind of betting on pedigree. He's a righty. The numbers have been okay to good this year, but you're betting on pedigree. Richard Rodriguez, 31-year-old right-hander, pitches for the Pirates. Again, Detroit, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, these are last place teams, okay? 31-year-old. He's got 2 years of arbitration left, but he is 31. He's a high spin fastball guy. The expected numbers, all elite. Expected on base average and ERA, both 96th percentile. Barrel percentage, 91st percentile. Walk rate, 99th percentile. The flip side is his average exit velocity, his hard hit percentage, and his whiff percentage are all really bad. Last year, his exit velocity and hard hit percentiles were the 3rd percentile and the 1st percentile. So like worse than all of baseball in those 2 numbers. But last year, his whiff rate was really good. The flip side is the numbers are good. 1.91 ERA this year, 0.74 whip. Last year, 2.7 ERA, 0.86 whip. He's got an 8-to-1 strikeout to walk ratio. So again, fits the Dodgers mold a little bit for me. High spin fastball guy, a little bit of a different look, strikes out a decent number, doesn't walk anyone, kind of fits the mold. The last one I'll throw at you, Kendall Graveman, righty, 30-year-old, pitches for the Mariners. The Mariners are 2 games over 500 right now, but they are 6.5 back of the division, 5.5 back of the second wild card spot. Graveman is also a free agent at the end of the year. This is a guy who the Mariners basically cut him and re-signed him for nothing last year. But this year, 1.31 ERA, 0.68 whip, 5 saves, 5-to-1 strikeout to walk ratio. Doesn't have a big enough sample size yet to do StatCast stuff. Doesn't have a real track record of being as good as he is right now, but there's some Fangraphs articles that have been written about him. He's a converted starter, moved to the bullpen, velocity jumps way up, ditches a third pitch that sucked, and he's kind of in the Blake Trinan mold, 2-seam slider, sinker, 2-seam/sinker pitcher with a slider as well. So I know I just threw a bunch of information at you, Fry, a lefty. The other three guys, all righties. Fry and Rodriguez with a couple years of arbitration remaining. Fulmer 1, Graveman free agent at the end of the year. Without talking about cost yet, do any of those guys jump out at you as, hey, that's a guy the Dodgers should go get?
Yeah, I think they're all pretty interesting. You know, they're all having pretty good seasons. I think we talk about reliever volatility a lot,
Yeah.
and you demonstrated it right there by saying like some of their numbers from last year and how bad a couple of those guys were, and then like compared to this year, how much better they are. I think that's something you have to consider, like especially when you're talking about like years of control. Like this guy has 3 years of arbitration years, which in theory, like that's a good thing. Like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, we get him for 3 years. But with how volatile relievers are, like you don't know if that's going to be 3 good years, if it's going to be 1 good year too bad. Like you just have
Yeah.
no clue. And those guys, typically, the more years of control they have, the more they cost. So I think that's why we've seen the Dodgers typically stay away from the relievers with a lot of control. We haven't really seen. I don't think Andrew Friedman's ever acquired like a good to elite reliever that has a lot of years of control.
Yeah.
Like, they've been mentioned in trade talks with a few, but they haven't been willing to give up the Gavin Lux,
Yeah.
the top prospects to get for relievers at least. Like they've been willing to do that for position players and starters, but not for relievers. And I kind of agree with it just because you never know what you're going to get out of those guys. Like Richard Rodriguez might be good the rest of this year, but let's say you have him for 2 more years, like who knows? So
Yeah.
I think those are all factors to consider. I think the one guy I kind of like is Michael Fulmer, just because of the pedigree that you mentioned. Like he's a former starter. I know he's dealt with a lot of injuries, which is why he's not really starting right now. They're kind of managing his innings, but we just talked about how bad the Dodgers' long relievers have been. And we've also talked about how the fifth starter spot is kind of in question now. So any guy who could kind of give you some length, and you could bring in Fulmer, he could pitch 2 innings or whatever. He could just throw one. He's not really built up to start, but he's a former starter. So like, I guess in a pinch, let's say Gonsolin gets hurt and you need a fifth starter, like maybe that could be a guy that you could build up to at least throw like 4 innings or so. So I kind of like Fulmer. You'd get him for not only this year but one more year. So it's not too many years where the acquisition price drives up, but you still get him beyond this year, and he's kind of a reclamation project type. Like I'm pretty sure he won the Rookie of the Year,
Yeah.
his first year in the big leagues. He's had good years in the past. He's both started and relieved, so he's got that versatility that we know the Dodgers love so much. So I definitely think he's a guy to probably keep an eye on. Think you got to be careful with Pirates relievers. I learned a couple weeks ago when the Dodgers were playing them, if you mention any player from that roster and in trade talks, you'll have every Pirates fan on Twitter coming after you. So I guess you got to be careful there. But yeah, I think all four of those guys would be solid options, and I don't think any of them would be too expensive. Like you're not giving up a top prospect for really any of those guys.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, this is the beauty of relief pitcher conversations. Fulmer is probably last on my list of these four guys, but I understand. Like, it's kind of with Fulmer, he's got the worst numbers of all of these guys. But it's kind of a question of, do you want to bet on the guy who's got pedigree? As you said, Rookie of the Year in 2016. He was an All-Star in 2017. This is his first year in the bullpen. So he had 10 appearances last year. They were all starts. This year, he's made 23 appearances, and just 4 of them were starts. He has 6 saves. Again, 3.5 ERA, 1.26 WHIP. So I see absolutely what you're thinking about there. And yeah, if you think he can be a starter / reliever for you, then I see the value. I think Fry.
Just real quick, I'll just to close out Fulmer. I think anyone who was good in 2016 or 2017 and has been injured since or bad since, that's someone to put on the Dodgers radar
Totally.
for sure.
Yeah, and he missed all of the 2019 season, I believe, with Tommy John surgery. I could be wrong about that. Comes back again last year, 10 starts, and was terrible. An ERA of almost 9. He had 10 starts and he pitched 27 and 2/3 innings. So some of those might have been like opener types of appearances. I'm not really sure. Right. I didn't dig in, but so that's Fulmer. I think Fry is interesting. Like the numbers are really, really good. 3 years of arbitration remaining. The thing to me is like the Dodgers just aren't desperate for a lefty. They've got Gonzalez, they've got Price, they've got Alexander, they've got Clevenger. And so I just don't think like that he's good enough to justify supplanting any of those guys. He'd come in and be the third best reliever. And it's like, are we really trading for a guy who's better than Alexander? Like he is definitely better than Scott Alexander and Garrett Clevenger, but like, I don't know if makes perfect sense just because he's a lefty. Haven't looked at his reverse split, so I don't know where he fits there. Rodriguez and Graveman to me are the interesting ones. Again, Rodriguez, he's 31 years old. He plays in Pittsburgh. So he feels like a guy that could be had for the right price. Like that's a team that's definitely going to be selling. And at 31 years old, it's not going to be a crazy price. Yes, he has 2 more years of control left. But the thing I like about him is just the production. The production's really good. I mean, the StatCast stuff, as I said, exit velocity and hard hit percentage are some of the worst in all of baseball. That's concerning. But I like that he doesn't walk guys. I mean, we've seen with the Dodger bullpen, pitchers that could throw strikes is a plus. He's had back-to-back years. I mean, again, 2020, a weird year, but back-to-back years with a whip of .74 this year, .86 last year. He's got an ERA under 2 right now, an ERA of 2.7 last year. So to me, the expected numbers are all at least elite. So I think Rodriguez to me is the most interesting. I do like that he has some control. I mean, I totally hear you that it's kind of volatile, but if you can get a guy like that who is basically probably like right now a better version of Joe Kelly, and you've got him for arbitration for 2 years, so you don't have to go out and pay $8 million a year to sign a guy like that. You're probably paying him about $8 million total over 2 years. I like Rodriguez, and I like Graveman too. I mean, Graveman, again, he's kind of one of these bet on the upside guys where he was a starter, now he's a reliever. You're like, yeah, I know the sample size is small, but the velocity ticks up. You can kind of make some sense of it. Again, 30 years old, free agent at the end of the year. I imagine the Mariners would be willing to part with him. The cost would not be incredibly high. The flip side to all of that is the Mariners are the one team we're mentioning who are technically still alive. They're not in last place, I should say. They're 5.5 back of the second wild card. And who knows? I mean, Graveman might be a guy that they want to sign long-term and say, hey, we need some help in the bullpen. Could we get this guy for 3 or 4 years? We've seen him pitch. So I would Graveman and Rodriguez are the two that's interesting. But I guess the one other thing I want to say about this conversation that's worth noting, I want to point out to people that are listening, like, none of these guys are, like I've said all along, if I was going to go get a bullpen arm, I want a guy who's going to come in and be one of the top 2 to 3 pitchers that we have. Like, that's the type of move. Like, I'm not going to upgrade over Bickford or Alexander unless I'm getting a guy that belongs in that top tier of Dodger pitchers.
Right.
Rodriguez and Graveman, I think you could make a case belonging in that 5 to 6 of the top 50 relief pitchers for sure. But none of those guys are going to come in and supplant Kenley Jansen as the closer. I think you can make an argument that a guy like Rodriguez is probably close to like a Blake Trinan as far as where he stands in the league. I mean, I know I'm lower on Trinan than you are, Daniel, and that I know a lot of Dodger fans are. I mean, Trinan's whip is like 1.1 to 1.25. Like Rodriguez is under 0.9 for the last 2 years. So that's where I'm getting that kind of information. But so that's like the headline is the elite relief pitcher, at least right now, does not exist on the trade market. Right. If you're going to get it, it's going to be a sort of somewhere in between your middle relievers and the back end of the bullpen kind of guys. Again, I would be content with Rodriguez or Graveman. The Dodgers have a glut of sort of pitching or prospects that like at some point they're not going to have room for on the 40-man roster. So if you could move 1 or 2 of those guys to go get a guy like Rodriguez or Graveman, I'd be all over it personally.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think that's the key there is like, yeah, those guys aren't the elite of the elite, relief pitchers, but that means you're not giving up as much to get them, right? Totally. Like you're not, you don't have to part with a Keibert Ruiz for any of those guys. And, Keibert, he's obviously probably the top prospect in the organization or a top 3 prospect, depending on what site you look at. But his stock is only kind of rising by the day. He's been mashing at AAA. So I think his stock is kind of played out at that range now, which is good because obviously you want to hold on to your top guys or at least use them as part of an even bigger deal, not just for a reliever. So I think it's good if you could trade one guy I'd be paying attention to is DJ Peters, just because we saw him come up. He didn't exactly have a whole lot of success. There's not really a clear role for him, whereas other guys you could kind of project where they're going to be 2-3 years down the road. And it's like, oh yeah, he's going to be a main part of the bullpen. He's going to be a back end of the rotation starter. He's going to be, competing for at-bats behind the plate, whereas DJ Peters, you don't really see like, what's he going to be, a 4th outfielder? Yeah. Like there's not a whole lot of value in that. So I think you got to let him go while he still has some value at least. So I think he's a name to watch for in trades like this, whereas like maybe the Pirates are, see something with him. He's still pretty young. He's still got a lot of talent isn't the question with him. It's
Yeah.
just putting it all together. So maybe they want to take a chance on a guy like him, and they could afford to give him major league at bats to finish out the year just because they're not competing for anything.
Yeah.
Whereas the Dodgers, you don't have that. So I think he's definitely someone to keep an eye on for trades like this. And yeah, I'm with you. I'd probably lean Rodriguez. His numbers this year have been pretty good. Like I'm with you. I'm not putting him on Blake Treinen's level, but I think he's kind of in that tier. Like he's kind of in the 3 to 4 range as far as the Dodgers bullpen goes, as opposed to the 5 or 6, which is what some of these other guys are. So I'd say he's probably would be number 1 on my list as far as, if you need a guy to come in a high leverage situation, like I trust, like when I mentioned Michael Fulmer, that wasn't really for high leverage bullpen innings. That's more of to replace the Usadas and Mitch Whites of the world for those type of outings, and also a spot start, here and there. So I think that's a completely different role that I see his value in, whereas Rodriguez is kind of a more of a high leverage guy, and same with the other 2 guys as well. But yeah, so I'd probably go with Rodriguez as far as, if you're trying to add a leverage type of reliever.
Yeah, and just looking at, Justin Norber, our friend, like looking at his top prospect rankings. I mean, like he had Andre Jackson, for example, like 18th in the organization coming into the year. Andre Jackson's had a good year. I don't think the Dodgers would want to move him right now, given their lack of starting pitching depth. But, I mean, like that's the type. Like Michael Grove is another guy I like. He was 15th. This is a guy who was a second-round pick back in 2018. Those are the types of guys where it's like, hey, could you move Michael Grove and DJ Peters? Like, does that get you close enough to get someone like that? Who knows? Like Landon Knack, for example, second-round pick in 2020, 21st on Justin Norber's list. Like, they've got a bunch of these guys that were first, second, third, fourth-round picks in the last 5 years. Jimmy Lewis, 2019 second-round pick, who's 29th. Right. Like, those types of guys where a team like the Pirates, it's like, hey, we'll send you a couple we'll send you like a quad A guy and then a lottery ticket, a pitcher who's like a single A or double A who is a top pedigree guy at some point. But the Dodgers have seen enough to say, like, if you're the 28th base prospect in the Dodger system, there's probably 8 starting pitchers ahead of you right now in the Dodger rankings. Plus, Buehler's going to be around for a while. Urias is going to be around for a while. Bauer, like Kershaw, like Gonsolin, May. Like, you just have guys ahead of you. So, obviously, Bauer and Kershaw are in the long term. But yeah, Josiah, so those are the types of moves that I think would be interesting. So something to watch there, some names to throw out. Google, look them up on Fangraphs and Baseball Savant if you want to. Let me throw one more name at you, Daniel. This is a name you and I talked a lot about preseason. Chris Bryant. Chris Bryant, we know the story, going to be a free agent at the end of the year. It doesn't seem like the Cubs are super interested in bringing him back, at least not until he tests free agency. The caveat here is I shouldn't say I actually think I predicted the Cubs to win the NL Central beginning of the season, but I think the overall expectation was that the Cubs wouldn't be very good. They are tied for the division lead. They are 8 games over 500. The caveat to all of that is whoever the Brewers and the Cubs tied, neither of those teams would be in the wild card if they didn't win the division. So, and it's early in the year, et cetera, et cetera. Here I think is the case for adding Chris Bryant, a guy who would cost you significantly more. I don't think he would necessarily cost you a Keibert Ruiz type, but he would cost you significantly more than the guys we just talked about. Right. Chris Bryant, he has a 252 weighted runs created against lefties this year. Career 166. So 100 is league average. So he mashes left-handed pitching. We know that's a weak point for the Dodgers lineup. Yes, he's a below average defender. He does have some versatility. I don't know if that's a plus if he's not good anywhere, but he's played first, he's played third, he's played right, he's played left. He could kind of, be competitive, I would say, in all those places. I think the natural reaction to most people is, do we have room for him? I don't know. Maybe most people's reaction is, yes, just add a guy who was like a former MVP candidate, yada, yada, yada. But looking at right now, the Dodgers lineup, if everybody's healthy, you have Muncy at first, Lux at second, Seager at short, Turner at third, Taylor in left, Bellinger in center, Mookie Betts in right, Will Smith at catcher. The guys that are on the bench in that situation will be AJ Pollock's kind of the odd man out, and it'd probably Pollock or Lux, right? Like Taylor.
Pollock and Lux, you could say they're a platoon just because Taylor could switch positions.
Switches, absolutely. Then you've got Pujols, you've got McKinstry, and you've got Austin Barnes kind of filling out your bench. Now, if you add Chris Bryant, Gavin Lux goes to the bench. That AJ Pollock, Gavin Lux platoon we mentioned goes to the bench.
Right.
You probably have Chris Taylor playing second base just about every day. You probably have Chris Bryant playing left field just about every day. And so, to me, when I think about it that way, I think we already know that AJ Pollock is not an everyday player. I think Gavin Lux has been good, but not necessarily amazing. He hasn't jumped at a position to the point where, like, I'm terrified of what would happen if he wasn't playing every day. While also keeping in mind, if you're giving Turner a day off every week, Betts a day off every week, Bellinger a day off every week, all these guys a day off, there's going to be plenty of
Right.
at-bats to go around. Not maybe to the degree that Lux and Pollock would want. But all that to say, he mashes lefties, which we know is a need for the Dodgers. And if you're looking for ways to upgrade this roster, we just mentioned there's not a relief pitcher who's elite that's out there. Starting pitching, you kind of have 4 guys you really trust. So now starting pitching is interesting because maybe you go get a starter that's elite and Julio is your 5th starter and then Julio's your closer come playoff time. So that's an option. But without going down that rabbit hole, Chris Bryant, let's say the cost is not Keibert Ruiz, but it's guys that are floating around. Just looking at the list, maybe it's Andy Pages or Cody Hosey, someone in that realm. If that's the cost to go get a year of Chris Bryant, are you interested?
Yeah, you kind of just stole my thunder there by flipping it to starting pitching because that's what I was about to do. I'm kind of out on Chris Bryant, just because we just went through the list of position players they got, and it's pretty good. Like there's no real need for Chris Bryant there, and I know he's in the last year of his deal, so like you said, you're not gonna have to give up any of your top guys if the Cubs are even dealing him.
Yeah.
We'll see, but let's say they are. Like you're not gonna have to give up your top guys. I kind of look at the Manny Machado package. Like the Dodgers gave up 5 prospects, but could you even name any of them at this point? Like, and I don't think any of them have really panned out. So it would be kind of similar to that. I think I'd say Machado is a little better than Bryant, so it's probably a little less than that. But with that being said, I just don't really see a need there. Like, if you got a platoon of AJ Pollock and Gavin Lux batting 8th in your lineup, like that's incredible. Like, and especially with the other guys they have in front of them. So I think the lineup is fine. I'd rather take that same exact package and go get Max Scherzer if he's available or someone like that where you could put them in the rotation and like you said, make Julio, your closer or your ace there. I think that makes a bigger impact on winning than adding, Chris Bryant to a lineup that's already the best in baseball. So yeah. I'd go the starting pitcher route, even though they don't have, a huge need for a starting pitcher. But if you're willing to give up those type of prospects to go get that elite type player who's in the last year of his deal, he's a rental. I'd rather go the starting pitcher route personally.
Yeah, just doing a quick search on the Machado. Yusniel Diaz was kind of the headliner there. He was sort of a young, toolsy kind of guy that he has not made the major leagues yet. He's doing okay, sort of floating around the minor leagues still, and he's young. So I think that was 2-3 years ago. So he's probably 24-ish. So that's it's not dead yet. But yeah, I mean, I think if you can, and I mean, in the caveat to all of what I was just saying about the lineup too is this is assuming perfect health, which as you pointed out early in the year, is probably not safe to assume. So I think that would be kind of the argument for Bryant is if everybody is absolutely healthy, then you have AJ Pollock and Gavin Lux basically on the bench. And your bench is really good at that point, right? Like you have Lux, you've got Pollock, you've got Pujols, you've got McKinstry. Like that's your bench, which you feel really good about.
Really good, yeah.
And if somebody does get hurt, then all of a sudden, like if one of your top 4 or 5 bats gets hurt, then all of a sudden Chris Bryant is offensively making up for that production. So to me, yeah, it's all about cost. I kind of talked myself into the starting pitching piece as I was sort of processing that out loud. But I don't know. I guess I came into when I was writing down this segment, I was like, Chris Bryant, like we could talk about it. I'm not interested. I looked at the numbers. I'm like, he smashes lefties. He is a really good hitter. He's going to be motivated to perform going into, a free agency year, going into free agency, I should say. And so I don't know if the price was right. And we know the Dodgers and Cubs have made moves before. So it's not to say that these two groups couldn't come to some sort of agreement. But I'd be curious. I mentioned Cody Hosey. That might be a little too rich for some people, depending on what you think about him. Pages, again, is a guy that like the Dodgers tried to trade to the Angels, and he like has more home runs than any other person 20 years or younger.
Thank God that deal never went through because I never understood that one.
Yeah, I mean they got more just for Ross Stripling by like a long shot than they would have gotten in return from the Angels. That included Peterson and Pages. So as far as it was reported, but for what it's worth. So something to watch. Maybe next week we can talk some starting pitchers that might be available. We'll get some more information on where Gonsolin is at, but could be something to watch there. Okay, last segment. We're running out of time here, but let's talk about the week ahead. It is Monday as we record. The Dodgers are in San Diego tonight. The Padres coming off of having swept the 500 Reds. This was after they had lost 13 out of 17. They did score 24 runs in those 4 games against the Reds. They've taken 4 out of 7 against the Dodgers this year. They are 3.5 back heading into the series. We've got Urias versus Darvish tonight, Kershaw versus Snell tomorrow, and Bauer versus Musgrove on Wednesday. I'll just look ahead. The Cubs are the back half of the week. The Cubs are 8 games over 500, as I said, tied with the Brewers. They're 2-5 in their last 7, but they do have an off day before coming to LA. The Dodgers will be at home. We do have starters as well. Buehler versus Davies, Gonsolin versus Arrieta, Urias versus Mills, and Kershaw versus Alzolay in that series. So obviously the Padres is the headliner. We can focus a couple minutes there. What do you make of this series? I know people are going to overreact. They're going to hype it up. What do you make of the Dodgers versus the Padres in San Diego this the beginning of this week?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the environment's going to be, pretty electric.
Yeah.
We saw what it was like at Petco Park earlier in the season, and that wasn't even at full capacity yet. They're at full capacity now, so I think it should be crazy. Obviously, we know how much Dodger fans love going down to Petco Park as well. So that should be nuts. And I think what we've seen from the Dodgers and Padres, you mentioned they've played 7 times this year. The Padres have won four of those 7. But literally every single game they played has been close and come down to the last inning or 2 or whatever. So I'm expecting more of the same. We got some really good pitching matchups. So I'm expecting some tightly contested, low-scoring games. The Padres, I'd say they're pretty healthy right now. Tatis had a little scare. I think it was on Saturday. He was diving for a ball and hurt his shoulder, but they took him out of the game. They said it was just precautionary. He sat out yesterday's game, and the expectation is he'll be back in the lineup tonight. So he's obviously, when you're talking about the Padres, he's the main guy you want to focus on. He's been on fire. I think he's got 22 homers this season, so he's been incredible. We know what he did the last time he played the Dodgers in that series. So he's at the top of the scouting report, of course. But yeah, these are obviously the 2 teams we expect to be there at the end of the season as far as the NL West goes. So these games count for double. So you definitely want to win, hopefully take 2 out of 3 in this series. The Dodgers are coming and playing better. I think the Padres had a good weekend series against the Reds, but you mentioned before that how bad they've been playing. So you definitely want to capitalize on that. And hopefully get a big series win there.
Yeah, absolutely agree with everything you said. And then looking ahead to the Cubs, I'm thinking, hey, maybe sweep the Cubs, knock them out of playoff contention. Maybe that Chris Bryant price comes down a little bit. Who knows there? But should be a good one.
That would be nice.
It should be a good week of baseball, as you said. Urias versus Darvish tonight should be great. Kershaw, Snell, and Bauer, Musgrove. I mean, that's elite matchups as you'd expect from both of these teams. So. Well, that'll do it for today's show. That's Daniel Starkand. I'm Jeff Spiegel. We will be back with a live post-game show for one of those games against the Cubs. TBD on that. We'll make sure to post some information. Rob and I will have a weekend preview on that Cubs series as well, so look for that probably Thursday morning as well. We'll have some update videos in the next couple weeks. As I mentioned, if you did not get a chance to go see it, check out the interview I did with Justin Lorber, future Dodgers, last week talking about the Dodger farm system. Was really good, really interesting stuff. So we appreciate you watching. As always, make sure to subscribe, ring the notification bell for us as well. Check out DodgerBlue.com for all the latest updates. That's Daniel. I'm Jeff. Enjoy your week.
The best team holding a trophy high in the air. The Los Angeles Dodgers, champions of the baseball world.